The morning sun shone gently over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds were singing, and children were leaving for school with backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. In the middle of the street, a man named David was polishing his motorcycle, a black Harley that had been his pride for many years. The Harley was more than just a bike to him, it was a memory of his late father, who had left it behind as a symbol of hard work, freedom, and family love. David lived alone in a small, neat house. He worked for the state attorney's office as a legal advisor, a job that required discipline, patience, and attention to detail. Most of his neighbors respected him for his quiet nature and his willingness to help anyone who needed guidance. But not everyone shared this respect. A few houses down the street lived Karen. She was the head of the homeowners association, a position she wore like a crown. She liked to control everything that happened in the neighborhood, from the color of flowers planted in front yards to how long cars could stay parked on the road. Many residents avoided arguments with her, but David was not someone who bent easily. He believed in fairness and rules, but he also believed in personal freedom. This quiet resistance had already made Karen watch him closely. One Saturday morning, David stood outside, finishing the polish on his Harley. The bike gleamed under the sun, and he stepped back to admire it. Just then, he heard footsteps running toward him. It was Karen's son, a tall teenage boy named Ryan. Ryan's eyes widened as he looked at the Harley. "Wow! This is so cool," Ryan said, circling the bike. "I want to ride it." David smiled politely. "It's a classic Harley. She's old, but strong. Sorry, kid, but this bike isn't for riding without proper training. It's heavy and dangerous if you don't know how to handle it." Ryan crossed his arms. "I can ride it. I play video games with bikes all the time. Just give me the keys." David shook his head firmly. "This isn't a game. A Harley is powerful. You could get hurt. Maybe one day when you're older, you can learn to ride. But not today." Ryan's face turned red with frustration. "That's not fair. My mom says I can have anything I want if I ask." Before David could respond, Karen appeared, walking quickly with her usual air of authority. Her sharp eyes locked on David, then on the Harley. "Ryan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice already edged with impatience. "He won't let me ride his bike," Ryan complained, pointing at David. Karen placed a hand on her hip. "David, it's just a motorcycle. Let the boy sit on it, maybe take a ride around the block. Don't be so selfish." David kept his calm tone. "Karen, I respect you as my neighbor, but this bike isn't a toy. It's a family heirloom and a dangerous machine. I can't let Ryan ride it." Karen's eyebrows rose. "Family heirloom? It's just an old Harley. Don't exaggerate. You should be more neighborly. My son deserves some fun. Why can't you be generous for once?" David took a slow breath, trying to keep the peace. "I'm sorry, but my answer stays the same. Ryan's safety comes first." Karen's face tightened. She was not used to being denied. "We'll see about that," she muttered, pulling her son back toward their house. Ryan gave the bike one last longing look before stomping away. As they disappeared, David sighed and turned back to his Harley. He had faced plenty of difficult situations in his professional life, but dealing with Karen was a unique challenge. He knew this was not the end of the matter. Karen had a way of turning small issues into storms. Later that evening, David prepared notes for an upcoming meeting with the state attorney. The briefing was important, one of those discussions where every detail mattered. He needed focus, but his mind wandered back to the encounter with Karen and Ryan. Something told him she would not let it go so easily. True enough, the next morning, when David stepped out to collect his mail, he noticed Karen talking to a group of neighbors. Her voice was raised, her hands moving dramatically as she pointed in his direction. Some neighbors nodded, others frowned with confusion. David caught only a few words: selfish, unfriendly, thinks he's better than us. He closed his mailbox quietly and returned inside without a word. He had no interest in starting an argument, especially with important work ahead. Still, he felt a heaviness in his chest. He loved this neighborhood, but it seemed Karen had decided to paint him as the villain. That night, David stood by his Harley once again, running his hand over the polished metal. His father's voice echoed in his memory: stand firm for what is right, even if it makes you stand alone. David didn't know how far Karen would go, but he knew one thing: he would not bend, not even under her pressure. And so, the quiet conflict had begun, with a Harley at the center of it all. The next week passed slowly, but the air in the neighborhood felt different. David noticed that when he walked outside, a few neighbors looked away instead of greeting him. Some whispered quietly, and others gave him half smiles that did not reach their eyes. He knew what was happening: Karen's words were spreading like smoke. David kept his focus on his work. He had an important task: preparing a detailed briefing for the state attorney about community land disputes. His notes were stacked neatly on his desk, and he spent late nights reviewing every file. But even as he worked, the sound of voices outside often distracted him. Sometimes he could hear Ryan complaining loudly about not getting the Harley. Other times, Karen's sharp tone carried across the street, reminding everyone that she was only trying to protect the neighborhood from selfishness. One Saturday morning, David decided to take the Harley for a short ride. The engine roared to life, deep and steady, and the sound drew several neighbors out of their homes. Ryan came running again, eyes full of excitement. "See, Mom. He's riding it again," Ryan shouted. "It should be mine." Karen followed, arms crossed tightly. She stepped onto David's driveway without hesitation. "David, I don't understand why you keep refusing," she said loudly, making sure others nearby could hear. "Ryan deserves the chance. He's young, he needs experiences. You're just being stubborn." David turned off the engine and removed his helmet. He looked at her calmly. "Karen, I've already explained. It's not safe for him. The Harley is important to me, and it's not for lending. I hope you can respect that." Karen's lips tightened. "Respect? You talk about respect, but you don't show any. You live in this neighborhood. This community runs on cooperation, not selfishness. Don't think you're above everyone else just because you work for the state attorney." David's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "My job has nothing to do with this. I treat everyone fairly. But I won't risk a teenager's safety for the sake of looking friendly. That's not responsible." Ryan stomped his foot. "Mom, do something." "He won't listen." Karen glanced at her son, then back at David, her eyes narrowing. "Don't worry, Ryan. We'll handle this. People who don't cooperate always face the rules." David watched them leave, her words echoing in his mind. He knew she meant the HOA. Karen had control over the board, and she often used it as a tool against anyone who stood up to her. That evening, David received an official-looking envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a letter from the HOA, signed by Karen herself. It stated that leaving a motorcycle in the driveway violated community appearance standards and that David had to remove it within 7 days. David read the letter twice, shaking his head. He knew the rules well: there was no such regulation about motorcycles. Karen had invented it. He placed the letter on his desk, next to his state attorney notes, and sighed. He could easily challenge the letter: the HOA rules were public documents, and he had copies. But he also knew Karen thrived on confrontation. The next morning, as he prepared coffee, his phone buzzed with a message from a colleague: "Don't let distractions shake you. The attorney values your input. Focus on the briefing." David smiled faintly. His work mattered. He couldn't allow neighborhood drama to take his energy. Still, when he stepped outside later that day, the whispers grew louder. Karen had gathered a few neighbors in her front yard. She spoke with passion, waving papers in her hand. When David walked past, the group went quiet. Ryan couldn't resist calling out, "Why don't you just give me the Harley already? Everyone knows you don't even use it much." David paused, turning to face him. "Ryan, this isn't about use. It's about responsibility. When you're older and ready, you can buy your own bike and care for it. That's how it should be." Karen stepped forward quickly, as if protecting her son from words she didn't like. "Don't talk to him like that. He's just a boy. You make him feel small when you say no. Do you enjoy hurting people, David?" David's voice stayed calm. "No, Karen. I don't enjoy saying no. But sometimes it's the right thing. Teaching responsibility is part of growing up." For a brief moment, there was silence. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure whom to believe. But Karen quickly raised her voice again, turning their attention. "Neighbors, you see how unreasonable he is. This man thinks rules don't apply to him. He hides behind his fancy job while ignoring our community spirit." David felt a weight in his chest, but he refused to respond with anger. He simply nodded politely and walked back to his house. Inside, he sat at his desk and looked at the Harley through the window. His father's words came back again, "You don't need everyone to agree with you. You only need to do what's right." David picked up his pen and returned to his briefing notes. The storm with Karen was growing, but he had faced storms before. He knew this was only the beginning. The following week, the tension in the neighborhood grew even stronger. David could feel it every time he stepped outside. Neighbors who once waved at him now kept their distance. Some whispered behind fences, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear that Karen's words were spreading deeper, shaping opinions against him. David stayed calm on the surface, but inside he felt a quiet sadness. He had lived in this neighborhood for years, always helping when someone needed advice with paperwork or when a family struggled with small disputes. He had never expected to be treated as an outsider. One evening, David was in his garage reviewing documents for the state attorney briefing. The Harley stood beside him, polished and silent. The smell of old leather and oil gave him comfort. He was deep in thought when a knock sounded at his door. Opening it, he found his neighbor, Mrs. Green, standing nervously. She was an older woman who often baked pies for the block. "David," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid to be seen. "I don't want to get involved in problems, but Karen is telling everyone you're breaking rules. She says the board will fine you and maybe even remove you from the HOA." David gave her a kind smile. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Green. Don't worry. The rules are clear, and I've done nothing wrong. Let her say what she wants. Truth has its own way of coming out." Mrs. Green nodded, relief showing in her eyes, before hurrying back to her house. The very next morning, David received another letter from the HOA. This time, it demanded that his Harley be kept in the garage at all times, claiming the motorcycle was ruining the visual harmony of the neighborhood. David laughed softly when he read it. He knew no such rule existed. Karen was inventing reasons to pressure him. Later that day, as David sat on his porch, he noticed Ryan across the street with a few other boys. They pointed at the Harley, whispering and laughing. Ryan shouted, "One day it'll be mine. Mom says you won't have a choice forever." David's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't reply, but the words stayed with him. Ryan was learning entitlement, not responsibility. That worried him more than the letters. The following weekend, the HOA held a community meeting in the park. David knew Karen would use it as her stage, but he attended anyway. He believed in facing problems directly. As expected, Karen stood tall in front of the crowd, papers in hand, speaking with dramatic energy. "Neighbors," she began, "our community is suffering because one resident refuses to follow our shared values. We work hard to keep our streets beautiful, yet some believe they can park loud, greasy machines in driveways as if rules don't matter." A murmur went through the crowd. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. Karen continued, her voice rising. "We all know who I'm talking about. David has been asked politely, yet he refuses to cooperate. What kind of neighbor acts this way?" David stood quietly, waiting for her to finish. When the crowd turned to him, he stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, without anger. "My friends, I've lived here for years. I've never broken a rule. The HOA documents are clear, there is no regulation against motorcycles in driveways. Karen knows this. The Harley you see is not just a machine. It was my father's. It's part of my family's history, a reminder of where I come from. I respect this community, and I will never put anyone at risk. But I will not be forced to give away something so personal, nor will I accept rules that don't exist." The crowd grew silent. Some neighbors looked thoughtful, others avoided his gaze. Karen quickly broke the silence. "See how he twists words? He hides behind sentiment. But rules are rules, and I decide how they are applied. If he refuses, then the board will act." David replied softly, "Rules are not created by one person's wish. They are written, approved, and shared by all. If anyone doubts, I have the documents at home. I invite you all to read them." This time, a few neighbors exchanged uncertain glances. One man spoke up quietly, "Karen, maybe we should check before making decisions." Karen's face flushed, but she smiled tightly. Of course. But we all know appearances matter. A motorcycle is not the image we want for our neighborhood." The meeting ended with no clear decision, but David could feel the shift. Doubt was starting to creep into the minds of some neighbors. He walked home calmly, though inside he felt the weight of Karen's determination. She would not stop here. That night, while working on his state attorney briefing, David's phone buzzed. It was a message from a colleague: "The attorney wants you ready by next week. Your notes are excellent, stay focused." David leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. His professional world was steady, built on facts and fairness. But his personal world was under constant attack from lies and pride. Looking out the window at his Harley, shining under the porch light, he whispered, "Father, give me patience. This storm is only growing, but I will not bend." He did not know then that Karen was already planning her next move, one that would involve more than letters and whispers. She was preparing to bring the law into the matter, in her own way. The days moved closer to David's important meeting with the state attorney. His desk was covered with neat piles of papers, highlighted notes, and carefully written outlines. The case he was preparing for was complex, involving community land disputes that required clear reasoning and detailed explanation. Every evening, David worked late, sipping black coffee and reviewing documents until his eyes grew tired. Yet, as much as he tried to focus, the noise from outside often broke his concentration. Karen had not slowed down. In fact, her efforts had only grown stronger. One afternoon, while David was on the phone with a colleague, he heard voices rising in front of his house. He stepped outside to see Karen standing with Ryan and two other neighbors. She was pointing at the Harley, her voice sharp and confident. "There it is," she declared loudly. "The cause of all this trouble. An eyesore on our street, a machine that doesn't belong in a peaceful community." Ryan crossed his arms, adding, "It should be mine anyway. He doesn't even deserve it." David placed his phone in his pocket and walked slowly toward them. "Karen," he said calmly, "this is my property. It has every right to be here. Please stop disturbing the peace. Karen turned to him with a smile that carried no warmth. David, you may think you're clever with your words, but I'll tell you this: your stubbornness is dividing our neighborhood. You care more about that piece of metal than about your neighbors. David's voice was steady. What divides a neighborhood is when someone spreads false rules and forces their will on others. My bike hurts no one. I've explained this many times. Why can't you let it go? Karen's eyes narrowed. Because you refuse to cooperate. A good community is built on sharing and compromise. But you hide behind papers and pride. David sighed. Compromise is not the same as surrender. If you want respect, you must also give it. The small group went quiet for a moment. But Karen quickly gathered her strength, pulling Ryan close. Don't worry, son. Some people only learn when the law speaks. And the law will speak soon. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. Ryan shot David a glare before following his mother. That night, David found another letter on his porch. This one was not signed by the HOA board but handwritten by Karen herself. The message was short: remove the Harley or face the consequences. David read the note twice before setting it aside. He had no intention of being intimidated. Still, he couldn't help but feel the pressure building. The timing was cruel. Just when he needed his full attention on the state attorney briefing, Karen was dragging him into unnecessary conflict. The following evening, David sat in his study, reviewing maps for the land dispute case. He had nearly finished when the sound of knocking interrupted him. When he opened the door, 2 police officers stood there. Good evening, sir, one officer said politely. We received a call about a disturbance. Someone reported that you might be keeping unsafe property in your driveway. David immediately understood. I see. You must be referring to my motorcycle. The officers nodded. We were told it might be a hazard for children in the area. David invited them to step forward and see the Harley for themselves. It stood quietly, locked and secure, shining under the porch light. As you can see, David explained calmly, it's in perfect condition. It's locked, doesn't move unless I ride it, and poses no danger. It's my property, and there's no rule against keeping it here. The officers examined the bike, exchanged a glance, and nodded. Everything looks fine here, sir. Sorry for the disturbance. David smiled politely. No need to apologize. Thank you for checking. As they left, he noticed Karen peeking from her window across the street. He knew she had made the call. She wanted to use fear and authority to bend him. That night, David sat by the Harley, running a cloth gently over its polished surface. He felt both weary and determined. Father, he whispered, I promise to honor your memory. I will not let lies take this away. The next morning, David returned fully to his work. He set his phone aside, closed the curtains, and focused on his papers. He knew he had to give his best at the state attorney briefing. No matter what Karen did, he could not afford distraction. Still, the thought lingered: if Karen was willing to call the police once, she might try again. She was not finished. She was building up to something bigger, and David could sense the storm ahead. For now, though, he pushed aside the tension, reminding himself of his father's advice: when pressure rises, keep your heart steady. The truth is stronger than noise. And so, while the neighborhood whispered and Karen plotted, David kept his focus on the task that truly mattered. But deep inside, he knew it was only a matter of time before Karen made her boldest move yet. The day of the state attorney briefing finally arrived. David woke early, dressed in a neat suit, and reviewed his notes one last time. His mind was sharp, his papers well organized. This was the moment he had been preparing for: an opportunity to present clear research on land disputes and prove his dedication to fairness. He set up his laptop and documents on the dining table, ready for the video call. The attorney and several senior officials would be listening. Everything needed to go smoothly. Just as the meeting began, David felt calm. He spoke clearly, explaining details, answering questions with confidence. The state attorney nodded often, making notes. David felt proud his long hours of study were paying off. But outside, trouble was already forming. Karen stood in her driveway, arms crossed, her phone in hand. Ryan stood beside her, sulking. "Mom, when are you going to do something? He never listens." Karen narrowed her eyes at David's house. "Don't worry, Ryan. Today he'll learn a lesson he won't forget." Without hesitation, she dialed the police again. Her voice was firm, dramatic. "Hello, I need officers right away. My neighbor is keeping dangerous property outside his home. It's unsafe for children and breaking HOA rules. Please hurry." Back inside, David continued speaking to the attorney, unaware of what was happening outside. He was just explaining an important map when the sound of knocking echoed loudly through his house. At first, he tried to ignore it, thinking it was a delivery. But the knocking grew stronger. "Mr. David," a voice called. "Police department. Please open the door." David froze for a moment. His eyes flicked to the screen, where the state attorney looked surprised. "Is everything all right, David?" the attorney asked. David forced a polite smile. "Please excuse me for a moment." He muted the microphone and went to the door. Two officers stood there again. "Sir, we received another call about a safety issue. Your neighbor reported unsafe property, specifically, the motorcycle." David sighed, though he remained calm. "Officers, as you can see, the Harley is parked safely, locked, and secure. You checked it just days ago." The officers nodded. "Yes, we remember. But since a call was made, we're required to check again." "Sorry for interrupting." David kept his voice steady. "I understand. Please, take a look. I have an important legal meeting, so I hope this won't take long." The officers inspected the Harley quickly. "No problem here, sir. Everything is fine. Sorry for the disturbance." David thanked them and closed the door. But when he returned to his laptop, he saw the state attorney and others still watching, curiosity on their faces. "What was that about?" the attorney asked. David took a slow breath. He could have brushed it aside, but he believed in honesty. "That was the police, sir. A neighbor has been making false complaints about my motorcycle. They've called twice now, trying to cause trouble. I apologize for the interruption." The attorney leaned forward, frowning. "False complaints? During an important legal briefing?" "Yes," David replied calmly. "But I want to assure you it's under control. The motorcycle is safe and legal. My neighbor simply disagrees with me. She wants me to hand it over to her son. I refused, and now she's creating problems." For a moment, silence filled the call. Then the state attorney spoke firmly. "David, thank you for being honest. If you can remain calm under such pressure, I trust your judgment even more. Let's continue." Relief washed over David. He adjusted his notes and carried on, his voice steady once again. The rest of the meeting went smoothly, his presentation clear and convincing. By the end, the state attorney smiled. "Excellent work, David. We'll move forward with your recommendations. You handled yourself with professionalism today." When the call ended, David sat back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. He had faced both professional and personal storms at once and had not lost his balance. But outside, Karen was far from finished. She stood by her window, frustrated that her plan had failed. Ryan paced angrily. "Why didn't it work, Mom? He still has the Harley." Karen clenched her fists. Don't worry. If the police can't take it, then the whole neighborhood will. We'll turn everyone against him. We'll show him he can't stand alone forever. Meanwhile, David stepped outside, looking at the Harley. The evening sun cast a warm glow on its polished frame. He placed his hand on the seat, whispering softly, "Father, I kept calm today. I hope you'd be proud." He knew the battle was not over. Karen's determination was growing sharper, her plans more daring. But David also knew something important: he was no longer shaken. The state attorney had seen his composure. His colleagues respected him. And though some neighbors doubted him, the truth was slowly making its way forward. As the crickets began to sing in the quiet night, David resolved in his heart, no matter what Karen tried next, he would stand firm. The days after the police interruption were quiet on the surface, but David could feel the storm building again. Karen was no longer satisfied with letters and complaints. She had seen her plan with the police fail, and now she wanted the entire neighborhood to stand with her. She began walking door to door, speaking in her usual dramatic tone. David is breaking rules. He thinks he's better than us. We can't let one man ignore community spirit. She carried copies of her handwritten notes, claiming they were official HOA rules. Some neighbors accepted them without question, but others felt uneasy. One evening, Mrs. Green visited David again. She held one of Karen's papers in her hand. "She says these are the rules," Mrs. Green whispered, "but they look strange. There are no signatures, no dates. Just her handwriting. Is this even real?" David smiled gently. "No, Mrs. Green. The official HOA documents are typed, signed, and kept in the office. I have my own copies. Karen has created these to convince people. Don't worry. Truth always finds a way." The next Saturday, the HOA held another meeting in the park. This time, more people attended than usual. The air was tense, filled with whispers and suspicion. David knew Karen would use this chance to push harder, but he also knew it was time to speak clearly. Karen began as expected. She stood in front of the crowd, holding her papers high. "Neighbors, enough is enough. We've given David every chance to cooperate, but he refuses. He hides behind excuses, calling his motorcycle a family heirloom, but it is nothing more than a loud, greasy machine that destroys the beauty of our street. Do we want this kind of example for our children? Do we want one man to decide the rules for all of us?" Ryan stood proudly beside her, nodding and muttering, "He should just give it to me already." The crowd murmured, some agreeing, others frowning in doubt. David stepped forward slowly. His voice was calm, steady, and respectful. "Friends, I hear your concerns. But I must speak the truth. Karen is showing you papers that are not official. The real HOA rules do not say anything about motorcycles in driveways. They are public documents, and anyone here is welcome to read them at my house." Karen interrupted sharply. "Don't believe him. He twists words. He uses his job with the state attorney to make himself sound important." David shook his head gently. "This has nothing to do with my job. This is about honesty. I will not ask you to trust only my words. Please, come and see the real documents. They are clear. No such rule exists." The crowd shifted. One man raised his hand. "Karen, why don't we check the official papers before deciding anything? If what David says is true, then we've been misled." A few neighbors nodded in agreement. Mrs. Green stepped forward, her voice firm despite her age. "I've seen David's copies. They are real, signed, and typed. What you hold, Karen, is your own handwriting. That is not how rules are made." For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. Her face tightened, but she forced a smile. "Well, maybe I wrote them down for convenience. The point is, but before she could finish, another neighbor interrupted. No, the point is you've been spreading false information. You made us doubt someone who has done nothing wrong. The murmurs grew louder, this time against Karen. Ryan looked confused, tugging at his mother's sleeve. Mom, what's happening? Karen raised her voice again, desperate. You don't understand. This man is dangerous. He refuses to share, but the words fell flat. More neighbors now turned to David with respect in their eyes. They saw his calmness, his patience, his willingness to show proof rather than shout louder. David bowed his head slightly. I never wanted conflict. I only wanted peace. My Harley is a memory of my father. It stands as a reminder of love, not division. I will never give it away, because it is part of who I am. But I will always respect this neighborhood and everyone in it. Silence filled the park for a moment. Then Mrs. Green spoke clearly. I believe David. He has shown us patience and respect, even when we doubted him. That is the kind of neighbor I want. Others nodded, voices rising in agreement. He's right. He's done nothing wrong. We should stop this nonsense. Karen's face grew pale. She opened her mouth to argue again, but no one listened. The meeting ended with the crowd walking away, leaving her standing alone with Ryan. That evening, David sat on his porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in weeks, he felt a weight lift from his chest. He knew Karen would not change overnight, but the truth was finally clear to the community. He placed his hand on the Harley's handlebar and whispered softly, Father, today your lesson lived again. Patience and truth are stronger than lies. Across the street, Karen stood by her window, her pride wounded. Ryan muttered, Mom, why didn't they believe us? Karen's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. If the neighborhood won't fight for us, then I will. One way or another, David will pay. David did not hear her words, but he could sense her anger. The storm was not completely gone, it was simply moving into its final stage. The neighborhood had changed since the last meeting. The whispers and doubts were gone. Many neighbors now greeted David warmly as he walked past, offering smiles and small waves. The truth had a way of spreading quietly, and Karen's false accusations were losing power. David's Harley gleamed proudly in his driveway, reflecting the morning sunlight. It was more than a bike, it symbolized patience, integrity, and the respect he had earned through calm and honest actions. Despite the outward peace, Karen and Ryan were still nearby, plotting in their own minds. Karen had tried letters, police calls, and meetings, but nothing had succeeded. Her frustration was evident as she watched neighbors chatting with David, even laughing alongside him. Ryan tugged at her sleeve. Mom, why do they like him now? We tried so hard. Karen's voice was low but firm. Because he never shouted. He never lied. People respect honesty and patience. You'll understand when you're older. Ryan frowned but said nothing. He was beginning to realize that demanding and complaining did not earn respect. That afternoon, David decided to host a small neighborhood barbecue. He had invited everyone, hoping to strengthen the bonds of community and show that he meant no harm. The smell of grilled vegetables and burgers drifted across the street, inviting curiosity. Several neighbors came, greeting David warmly. Mrs. Green handed him a small pie, smiling proudly. You've shown everyone the right way to handle problems, David, she said. Even those who had once whispered now approached, offering apologies or nods of recognition. David accepted them graciously, never holding a grudge. From across the street, Karen and Ryan watched. Karen's arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. Ryan tugged at her sleeve again. Mom, maybe we were wrong. He didn't yell, didn't fight, and people still like him. Maybe I should apologize. Karen hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yes, Ryan. Sometimes, we must learn the hard way. Today, you see that patience and truth win. Keep that in mind. Meanwhile, at the barbecue, David's Harley gleamed at the edge of the driveway. Several children peeked at it curiously, but David spoke gently. One day, when you are older and responsible, you can learn to ride. For now, enjoy looking. It's a special memory, not a toy. Ryan watched from across the street, thoughtful. He realized that David's calm strength had earned respect, while his own demands had gained him nothing. Slowly, he approached the fence. David, Ryan said quietly, I'm sorry for always demanding things. I didn't understand. Maybe one day, I can earn trust, like you have. David smiled, extending his hand. Thank you, Ryan. Apology accepted. Everyone learns in their own time. Keep practicing patience and honesty, and you'll do well. Karen nodded behind her son. Though she did not openly apologize, she had recognized the lesson. She understood that her attempts to force control had failed. David's integrity had been stronger than her pride. The barbecue continued, filled with laughter and simple conversation. Neighbors shared food, exchanged stories, and enjoyed the calm of a peaceful afternoon. David's patience and honesty had not only protected his Harley but had also reminded everyone of the values of respect, fairness, and truth. As the sun began to set, David stood by his Harley once more, watching the warm light play across the polished black surface. He remembered his father's words, "Stand firm, even if you stand alone." Truth and patience always win in the end. The neighborhood had seen it firsthand. Karen's lies and manipulation could not outweigh calm, consistent integrity. Even Ryan had learned that respect and trust are earned, not demanded. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of weeks of tension lift from his shoulders. He had not only preserved a family memory but had strengthened the community around him. Neighbors now understood the value of fairness and truth more clearly. From across the street, Karen finally returned inside, quietly closing her curtains. Ryan followed, thoughtful and silent. Though they had not openly acknowledged defeat, the lesson was clear. David's way had won, and it was a lesson neither would forget soon. That night, David sat on the porch beside his Harley, sipping tea. The stars appeared, bright and calm above the neighborhood. A quiet smile touched his lips. For the first time in weeks, he felt complete peace. He whispered softly, "Father, we made it." Patience, honesty, and respect, they truly do win. The neighborhood was calm again, filled with laughter, trust, and simple respect. And David's Harley stood proudly, not just as a bike, but as a symbol of integrity, patience, and the quiet strength to do what is right.